Hello, you're listening to the K12 Tech Podcast, bringing you insights into the world of education technology. Stay tuned as we discuss the past, the present, and most importantly, the future of technology in our schools.
Hello, and welcome to another edition of the K12 Tech Podcast. My name is Sean. I am your host for today and probably the future. I do have a special guest with us today coming from overseas. It's currently probably a 14-hour difference that we're talking right now. Amber Acosta is joining us, and she is over in India, and we are going to get an international perspective today on tech in the education world and how things are probably much different than here in the US. So Amber, I'm going to give you the floor, kind of introduce yourself. How did you get over there, and how did you get into the tech world in India?
Sure. So yeah, that's kind of a long story, but I'm happy to tell about that. So I'm right now the elementary technology integrationist, and I'm also head of department for K-12 for ICT and design technology at the Canadian International School in Bengalaru in India. And that's kind of in South India. For people who aren't really familiar with the geography, we have great weather here all year round, and it's a great place to travel Southeast Asia. So that's where I am, and that's the school I'm at. And I started international teaching I would say about 15 years ago, and it seems like a really long time. I can't even, remember teaching in the States since it's been so long for me. But I'm from Connecticut originally, and I got my master's degree in education from there, from Fairfield University, in Sacred Heart University in Fairfield. And I had met my husband, and he is actually from Egypt, and we were living in the States for a while, and then we decided to move back to Egypt, and that's when I started international teaching for the most part. And I had a short stint earlier after college, but that's when I really got into international schools, and we decided we'd make a jump there. And actually, my husband started teaching with me too at the American International School of Egypt. That was the second school I was at in Egypt, and he joined. And so he's also in international education as well. So after Egypt, we decided to move on to Bahrain. So we were there in Bahrain, and then just last year we decided to move again. And so now we're in India, and that's kind of how I've made it here. And I originally started as a classroom teacher in elementary, and I did that for almost years. And I actually am really glad I started out as that, because doing tech integration, it's really important that you understand the inner workings of a classroom and instruction and curriculum and all of those things to be able to make an impact. So I'm really glad that I started out with that first. And then when I was at the American International School in Egypt, I had the chance to start working in technology. And that's kind of when I started that. And I just kind of found my place. I was really, really suited me. I really was, interested in that area of education. And because I had the classroom background, I was really able to connect with people and help them use technology in their classroom. And, both teach students and teachers at the same time, and, collaborate on that kind of basis. So that was kind of a really great thing for me. And I'm also certified to teach technology in the US as well. And I'm a certified technology integrationist. And so that was kind of where I decided to move to in my career. And so all of the kind of experience kind of built up, and where I am today is really great. I totally love what I do. And the international side of it is kind of a little bit different, I guess. And I guess I'll explain that. So I work at international schools, and they are generally schools made up of both locals and expats, people who are working in different countries, maybe for either like large corporations, sometimes foreign diplomats, or it could just be, someone who's moved to another country. It doesn't have to be specifically work related. So our school that we're working at now has a large population of both local Indian students and also expats. We have quite a few. And that's kind of the idea of international schools. Although depending on what school or what country you're at, the breakdown of local and expat students can definitely kind of vary. So the language of instruction is always English. And students have the option to take foreign languages, and there is, a variety of curricula that can be taught. Right now we use Cambridge, and we're also an IB school in the secondary for grades 11 and 12. But other schools I've taught at kind of have an option where it's American curriculum, and then you can decide if you want to do IB later on. So it can be a mix. There's lots of different ways international schools can kind of have that. And it just depends on what type of school you're at. Also in international schools, generally, there's the same thing with teachers. Usually they get on staff kind of a mix of staff from the country you're in, and also staff from various countries around the world. I work with staff from, the UK, from Australia, lots of different countries. But the main thing is you would need to be a certified teacher. Generally, most of my colleagues have masters, not all, but a lot of them do, or they're working on them. So that's kind of what international schools are like. And it's really great to work at international schools. If there's any teachers listening, I highly recommend it. It's a great learning experience. It definitely pushes your boundaries, and you get to do lots of traveling and, different perspectives. So it's really great. I actually just met a colleague virtually, actually, on Facebook, who will be coming to join our school, and she's from Connecticut, and she's never been outside the US for international teaching before. So I was like, oh, you're in for a treat. And, you have to be ready to face some new challenges, but I definitely recommend it to everyone because it's definitely a great experience to, learn and grow.
Yeah, that'll definitely be a change for sure. But it's really cool. That has to be, you have had to have seen so many things, met so many people to get to where you're at now. So while teaching itself might present its own, I don't want to say issues, but learning curves. So I know when we spoke previously, we talked about how technology is still integrated in these international schools. Clearly, there's essentially a process for rolling out these programs in the US, getting state funding for them. How we use technology in classrooms is, I don't want to say standard, but it's fairly standardized across the board. How is that different working in an international school in India or any other country that is not the US?
Right. Yeah. So last time we talked about that was kind of even interesting to me too, because it's been a while since I've been in a US public school, quite some time. So there's definitely big differences. Right now, the trends in international schools are for students to have, one-to-one device programs. And I would say in secondary, it's pretty standard across almost, I would say, nearly all international schools. And the elementary divisions, I would say kind of 50-50. The idea of like carts or sharing iPads is definitely on the way out because it's just not that efficient. And there's a lot of problems that it presents as far as scheduling and, with sharing the carts, students, deleting each other's work, all sorts of things like that you just go, this isn't working out. And so, but that was at some point, I would say maybe 7 or 8 years ago, like having a cart for elementary, and iPad cart was pretty common. At least for, like I said, for elementary, it would be. So what now kind of the trend is, I would say, is that most schools and elementary and secondary are having some kind of one-to-one device program, but it wouldn't be through government funding like in the US. It would be that it's really part of your school supplies, and the students are required to bring them in. I would say a lot of schools are Apple schools, and I think iPads are pretty common for that. Some schools definitely have MacBooks, in secondary, iPads in elementary. There's definitely schools that are flexible about devices. I find that a little tricky. I can talk about why later. But there definitely are schools that allow you to choose your device to bring in. So basically you would, the students would know, okay, this year I'm in third grade and I need to this year bring in, a ninth generation iPad this year, because the generations would, every year something new comes out, then the incoming grade to third grade would have to kind of upgrade and say, okay, this year, this is what we're going to ask for parents to send in with the kids. So the devices would be part of basically their school supplies, and they need to bring them in every day charged, and the devices would be school managed. That is something that is really important, but it kind of is, I think, tricky because in the States, if the device, belongs to the school, then people don't really have as much of an issue because, okay, well, the school owns the device at the end of the day, so they can manage the device. I think the trickier thing in international schools, you can have issues when, so the parents would be the ones buying the device and they say, okay, well, I know it's your device, but we're going to be managing it. So, so that the kids have the right apps on them. So there's the security on them. So there's all the things that the device management system would offer just to make things more streamlined. So that's kind of
a lot of pushbacks from them. So I mean, is that a difficult conversation to have, or do they understand that it's sort of necessary?
Yeah, so we, I've done a rollout in Bahrain, at the school I was part of starting there, and we're doing a rollout in my school now in elementary, and we, you generally try to have a session with parents first, parents who are concerned, so you say, come on in, if you have any questions about the device program that we're starting. There's it's funny because usually a couple people who are really vocal on either sides where they'll be like, it's my device. I'd like to have control over it. This isn't the school device. And you say, well, you have to have that conversation. Well, it is. And if you leave the school, or if your student graduates, to secondary where we don't manage the devices, then that's fine, but we just, it's really important in elementary, especially because the kids really don't have the responsibility yet to be able to manage the devices themselves. And we start to teach them that, so that way they'll have those skills in secondary. So you do get pushback because I get it. It's like, the app store is blocked usually when you manage the devices. And so then, well, I'd like my child to have, this whatever game app they like when we go on vacation. Well, I know, but this is a school managed device. You have to see it kind of like a textbook, that's what it's for, and it's only for that. So I see it also as kind of a mindset thing where you don't want the kids to bring it to school and feel like, oh yeah, this is also my fun device, like for, entertainment, because we really do want to be using it for educational purposes. I also have the opposite, where some parents are thrilled because they're like, great, I won't have to worry that my child has this and this app on there. And I had a parent just come in and tell me that, I'm so happy, you can take our device and you can put the management system on, and we're super thrilled with it, because then, we won't have to worry about our daughter doing this or this or this to the iPad. So you kind of get like either one, and then most people are in the middle where they're okay with it. Maybe they've had that in a previous school because it's pretty standard. And so they're just like, I see it's the way it is, and, it's fine. And what I generally recommend to parents at international schools is, if you are not happy with the idea of, the managed device, get another device for entertainment, even if it's a super cheap one that you buy used somewhere. Well, use that iPad for, the fun. So that's what I generally recommend. If, and I think it's fair. I'm a parent too. So is my principal, so we're all, in the same boat in all of these cases where, we're also parents too. So yeah, it's really interesting. to see what the reactions are, you definitely have to have some conversations, but all of the policies usually are, they're not usually, well, always, they're there for a reason. But it's sometimes it's hard for an outsider to kind of understand why that would be if you're not really used to, or you're not, in education or technology, or you don't work at a school. And that kind of actually brings me to the choice in device part, if I can talk about that.
Yeah, absolutely.
So another thing is, along with, having the devices managed by the school, another thing that I often hear parents in international schools talk about, again, because they're buying the devices, like, oh, well, how come we can't have, like, an HP laptop, or, I have a really great, Samsung or whatever it is, why can't we use this, And so the thing is, this is something I get a lot too. And I get it, because, if you already have a device and you want to use it, or, some people really are fans of, PCs and not Apple products. And so, I get a lot of that, like, how come, you're using Apple, and, we have this device and we'd like to use it. So one thing that I talk about with parents, and it doesn't seem like, if you're not teaching in a classroom, so understandable, but like when you're there and teachers are trying to model for the students what to do, you can imagine that if everyone has different devices in class, it's kind of really difficult, for if the teacher's got the Apple iPad that everyone, should have, and they're showing you, okay, this is what you need to do on your device, and they're modeling that they've mirrored it. And if everyone has a different device, it doesn't look the same. It might not be able to run the same app. And so you end up, having a lot of wasted educational time, just trying to get everyone to, do the same thing. So that's one of the reasons, I talk about, that it's really important when you have a device program, although it seems sometimes unfair to people that they can't bring their own devices, especially in elementary. It's really important, because to make sure the kids are on the same page, you really have to be able to model that, and they have to be able to follow along. It's like if the teacher had a book and then all the kids have a different workbook, and so how can they figure out what to do? It's quite difficult, and it's not efficient. In secondary, it can be a little bit different because the kids are older. They're generally more independent. Although I don't recommend it, I always recommend that it's the same devices as the teachers have, so it looks exactly the same when they're modeling an activity. I think in secondary, it's a little bit easier to have like slightly different devices, because usually it's not as app-based either in secondary. It's more web-based. So if you have a device to access the internet, usually it's okay. But in elementary, it's very app-based. So, there's that. So that is one thing. As far as efficiency, like those are the two things I really, put a lot of emphasis, having the same devices, and that the devices are managed by the school. And also when you have, you're going to have IT problems. And when you have IT problems, you can't expect your IT department to be able to troubleshoot on 50 different kinds of devices, so you really have to be like, okay, well, they know how to troubleshoot on Apples from this generation to this generation. And that's what they can focus on, being really, good at troubleshooting. And you just really can't expect them to be experts in every single type of device. And again, there's always problems. There's always going to be someone who can't connect to the internet, someone who, their device isn't working. And so to be able to also have that, quickly resolved, you need to make sure you have some kind of guidelines as far as, what kind of devices you're using.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would say, most schools here use Chromebooks, and obviously there's many different models of those.
Mm-hmm.
As a repair company, we do need to know how to troubleshoot and repair all of those
Absolutely.
different devices. But from the student's point of view, every single Chromebook works exactly the same.
Yes.
Now you get to iPads and MacBooks, and now, instead of the X being up in the top right corner, it's in the top left. And So as a very young kid, yes, I could see how trying to follow along with the teacher that's showing me how to do something, if it's not exactly the same, could be very confusing. So
Exactly.
that makes a lot of sense to me. And even I mean, I'm an Android phone user.
Mm-hmm.
When I try to use someone's iPhone, I have a hard time just going back to where I just was. And I'm in
Right.
my 30s.
Yeah.
So completely makes sense to me.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that kind of goes along with something else I wanted to talk about that. So when we, expect teachers to use the technology in the classroom, that's also something that is, we want to make easy for the teacher, right? So you want to make sure that they have, a smooth experience being able to, use the technology in their classroom. And that does go along with it. Like you said, it could be really frustrating as a teacher to, have the students, okay, well, we're going to, make, I don't know, like book creator books, and then maybe this device looks different than this device and it just becomes a big time waster. And then as a teacher, I can totally understand if that teacher said, well, I don't think I'm going to try that again. So I think I'm just going to have them do it on paper. We're not going to try this again. So you have to kind of be really careful about when you're rolling out one-to-one programs, about making sure that first of all, that you try to make sure the device management and models are kind of all efficient and it's seamless there, because if you're teaching a lesson, it really makes a big difference. And then also that one thing I'm really very keen on is actually, not that it's like a plug for my job, but like tech integration is really important, and tech integrationists are super important to have that as a position at any school, because I know from being a classroom teacher that saying, okay, well, the kids have all these devices now, go ahead and use them, like, well, how? And like, can you give me an example on how to use them? And like, what's the best way? And then, having a situation where maybe it's frustrating, like, what do you do? And I can see why, a lot of times programs might not go so well because, a teacher tries something and then it doesn't go well and they don't really have anywhere to go for support. So one thing I try to really do is, make sure we have enough sessions to make sure people are comfortable with technology and with the devices and using them in the classroom, and understanding, like, I'm happy to come anytime, like I'm going to come to your planning meetings, and then anytime you need to book me for class, even if you think it's something small, I'm going to come and I'm going to help out and I'm going to be there. Maybe I won't say anything the whole time if you don't want me to, and, but I'm going to be there to support the process. And if something goes wrong, I'm there to help, like, it's not like you in front of the class going, oh my God, this isn't working out, So that's one thing, I'm so surprised when I find schools that don't have that position as like a technology integrationist, because I love IT departments, they're great. Every school needs one of those too, but like, they're not the same thing where they can understand the intricacies of like using technology in instruction and when it might be time for you to jump in or help out or coach or whatever the case is, and also they're not really in a relationship building position, which is definitely what tech integration is. You need to have relationships with the teachers on staff so that you can collaborate and help. And that's kind of where I think it's really important, because otherwise you can have the greatest, technology, but if nobody's using it because they don't feel comfortable with it, then it's not going to be worth anything. And that was one thing I was surprised at talking to some teachers recently in the US, saying, oh, we don't have a technology integrationist at our school. And I'm going, oh, like, that's hard. That's difficult. Like, who do you go to when you need some advice or you need help, or you want to do a technology project and you're on your own. So, and I think that you said sometimes you ask the person next door,
Yep, your neighbor's your best friend sometimes when you're in the classroom. How you've mentioned coding a few times, and obviously your position or your expertise is in integrating technology into classrooms. I'm assuming that's across all different curriculum.
So yeah, I was surprised to hear also some people that I know in the States mentioning that sometimes classroom teachers actually are being asked to teach coding. And I was like, oh my gosh, like that too. And yeah, so coding is something I'm like quite passionate about teaching at the elementary level. And I know I was talking to you before about why I think so. And so for me, I never thought I would end up teaching coding, but I just love it because I see the value of it behind just computer science. And the idea that, oh, well, maybe they're going to be, coders when they grow up, or they're going to work at, a technology company or something like that. So I really find so much importance in computational skills. Computational thinking is really important. And so I'll just give some examples. So like, when one of the computational thinking skills is decomposition. So you might be teaching it in a coding context, but decomposition is, putting things together, taking them apart. And that's something you do in math. Like, when students are learning math, they might be, putting together and taking apart numbers in a problem. So yes, you're doing it in coding, but the concept is applicable to math, and to plenty of other subjects. Pattern recognition is a computational thinking skill. So I often think, in poetry, there can be, patterns in, repetition. In music, it's understanding, pattern recognition in, the beats or the rhythm. And so pattern recognition is something you definitely, teach in the context of coding, but it transcends, coding itself. Same thing with, abstraction, which is focusing on, the most important thing. And, first thing that comes to mind is, main idea of a story in language arts. So there's just so many parts of that I've come to realize, like, wow, coding is super important, not because necessarily all my students are going to become, coders someday, but because those skills, transcend just, one subject. It's not just computer science. You're actually helping them develop skills to, master other subjects and concepts. And, and the other thing was that I really, as I taught it, one thing I started to notice was that there was also a real kind of growth mindset that I noticed when you're teaching it. It's almost that you have a chance to kind of promote growth mindset, because a lot of times, students will fail at the code that they're writing. I mean, very, very frequently. And so how do you overcome that problem? The frustration, how do you move on? How do you develop a growth mindset to be able to overcome, failure? And so that's something that's not that easy for students to learn all the time, because it's like a socio-emotional kind of skill. But actually, I realized that coding is actually quite a good way to teach it. And we talk a lot about, the concept of debugging, and that actually really, for me, matches growth mindset, because you're looking for, the mistakes, and then you're going to find them. But how do you overcome that when you just can't figure it out? Some kids get quite, upset. So that's a way to kind of teach, that growth mindset and socio-emotional like growth and development. So that was the other thing. So I really that was really interesting to me. And I that's one thing I, go back on, where I'm glad I have a classroom background, because when I started teaching this, and I just love coding, I just love it for, the sake of computer science. But then I realized, wow, it's actually it's super important, not just for that, but it can, really be connected to almost any subject. And it really does help the kids develop, skills and concepts in all those subjects. And so connecting it also across the curriculum, there's so many different, ways to do it, just so many different project ideas. I'll give you a couple examples. At our school recently, I was working with a class on an integration project for habitats in second grade. And we were using BBots to we created a habitat on a huge piece of like butcher paper. They made the graph out for the BBot. They decided on the habitat and designed each square to look like creatures or plants in the habitat. And then they coded BBot to, take a trip through the habitat. And it was really awesome. And that was, them learning computer science skills, but at the same time integrating what they learned in their science part of their unit study. And all of them got to choose everything about the project, like what habitat they were going to work on in their group, what things that they would put in their habitat, and exactly how BBot would travel around. They coded that themselves. Another project I did was we had students code to teach people how to reduce, reuse, recycle in Scratch Junior. So they created 3 scenes to teach others about how to reduce, reuse, recycle. So instead of just, telling someone or writing a book about it, they actually created interactive scenes to teach people how to do that. And it was really cool. And they presented it to kindergartners who were about to learn Scratch Junior, and taught them those concepts, and that was really great. A previous school, we were using Spheros and did a project where the Sphero, they made a huge butcher paper with the human body. And they had Sphero travel through. It was kind of similar to the Habitat project, but Sphero would travel through and ask questions about the human body, like at the different, organs or body parts that it was coded to land on. So a lot of different ways to integrate. Whatever kind of subject there's tends to be some kind of link. Again, you don't want to force it. It has to be something, that is, I never, when I'm planning with teachers, it's never like, well, we have to integrate technology in this. It's always like, does this work? Is this going to add value? Is there agency in this? Because sometimes, and this is something I really also really talk about a lot to teachers that I work with, is that we don't have to integrate technology into everything. We also, part of it is knowing when we should use technology and when we shouldn't use technology, because it doesn't always add value just because we're using it. Sometimes we have to say, well, this isn't going to add value, so we're not going to use it, and that's okay. And sometimes we're like, wow, this is just going to bring, student, knowledge and understanding to the next level. So yeah, we're gonna do this, or they're gonna have voice and choice. So we're gonna do this. But sometimes you're like, it's not gonna work. So it's always something we don't want to force just for the sake of it.
So as a former teacher, I have to ask, are the teachers also learning how to code? Because if I was teaching a science lesson and I wanted to do something where the students were going to be coding a scene or recycling or whatever it is, and they asked me a question, I would have no idea how to answer it. So does the staff also learn how to do all of that?
The way usually it works is I wouldn't expect them to teach the coding skills part of whatever project we're doing. However, it would generally be, so it can work 2 ways. Sometimes if the class has a standalone technology lesson, sometimes I'll be teaching them that in the standalone technology lesson, like the coding skills themselves. But if it's a class that has just integration, the teacher is going to be there when I'm teaching this. And sometimes teachers are really super interested and will pay attention to the coding aspect, which is the ideal thing, because we're working together. They're there. If they can also learn alongside the kids, they're going to be able to support their students with the project even better. So that's ideal. I mean, I know that not everyone is super interested in the coding aspect of it, and they have lots of other things on their mind, being classroom teachers. But there is a big, I would say, percentage of teachers that will sit there and themselves learn how to do the coding as well. And actually that goes for a lot of the different projects we do. I always, because it's a collaboration, generally the teacher, he or she should be, kind of also part of the teaching. And so I've had a lot of teachers, especially with digital publishing, seems to be really popular. When I teach Canva, a lot of teachers are like, oh, I'm gonna, I want to see how to do this too, because, I'd like to use Canva as well, because it's so useful in, doing lots of things, like party invites, posters, cards, all sorts of things that you might do in your personal life, or even, in the classroom, making different kinds of visuals. So a lot of times when I teach Canva, that's definitely a big one where people are like, ooh, I want to learn how to learn these new features in Canva. How do you do this or that? But also coding, it's also, some people are quite interested in it as well. But I try to have an understanding that, because classroom teachers have so many other things to do, that if they're not experts, or maybe are not, catching the whole thing, that's what I'm there for. So it's okay.
All right, that makes sense. And that's, so it's more of almost like a co-teaching setting then?
Absolutely, yeah. That's the
Okay.
ideal. That's the ideal setting, is like it's kind of like a co-teaching. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I would say that's definitely more beneficial. What we used to do was the students would be off for the day and we would all sit in the same room and we'd get a demonstration on a projector. And then here's the new thing we're using, use it in the classroom. And we're like,
yeah.
All right, did anyone take notes?
Will I remember this?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So co-teaching is definitely, that is 100% more efficient or more effective.
Yeah. I definitely do PD sessions. I especially like to do Google Workspace ones, which is sometimes not even necessarily something you're going to be doing with your students. But I really like that, to do PD sessions on that. And also I'll often kind of like poll teachers to see if there's a certain tool that they want a session on. And usually it's optional. It's usually not like required, but I'll say, hey, like on this PD day or after school on Thursdays when we stay late, I'm going to do a quick session on, Nearpod. If you want to come, it's going to be at 3:30, and you can join in. So I definitely do that, but it's optional. And oftentimes one of two things will happen. They'll say, hey, yeah, I do want to use this in my class. I'm going to do that, Wednesday morning at 8:00. Can you come in? And I'll be like, sure. And I've also had a session. I recently did a presentation on I was doing a Google Maps session at this EdTech conference. Well, it's actually not just EdTech. It's actually educational conference that we have at our school every year. And I had a couple of teachers in elementary say, hey, like, I really like that. Can you like teach me more? And I said, sure, we'll do another session. And it was a small group that came, like a few people. And we were able to, kind of build on what was done at the session that I did with like the large group. And then if they had specific questions, they could ask in like a smaller setting so they could gain a better understanding of it. So those are all kind of things that like I do. And I just try to, be really flexible and, absolutely that, like you said, that's really hard to be like, hey, let's have a session now, for an hour and now you've got to use it in the class, go ahead, so it just feels kind of like you're kind of throwing someone in the deep end, which is definitely not what I want people to feel like. So yeah, that's definitely why, tech integrationists have a role in schools when you're asking people to, use technology in the classroom. If you ask people to do it, you need someone there to support them.
So where are you moving to next?
That's a really good question. I am not sure. I think Poland might be on the list, actually.
Oh, that'd be awesome.
Yeah, my son may be attending college there. It's a very strong chance. So we might, in a few years, be headed there. We'll see, though. Things can change. Sometimes with international teaching, you go, oh, there's an amazing opportunity in this country. I never thought about that, So things can change, but that's kind of the country that's on my strong possibility list right now. But like I said, you never know. To be honest with you, at this time, well, maybe about a year and a few months ago, if you had asked me or told me I was moving to India, I'd have been like, what are you talking about? I'm not even planning on going on vacation there. And here I am. So it could change, but I do hope it's Poland, and that would probably be in a few years. And so the world is your oyster.
Sure.
And once my son graduates high school, it's kind of like going to be quite flexible for us as far as where we might go. So we'll see. Yeah. And in the meantime, planning on traveling to some new countries while we're in India, because lots of great places nearby to go to.
Absolutely. So this is a little off topic, but it is going to be my last question for you.
Mm-hmm.
If a tech director or another educator that is listening to this podcast right now would like to get into this international teaching scene, how do you go about that? I mean, you just Google, like, I want to be an international teacher, or are there programs you enroll in, or how does that work?
Sure. So it's pretty there's a few ways to do it. I think the most popular way that's pretty standard is there's some agencies that people sign up for. You have to pay a fee, and then you sign up for the agency, and you can look at the job listings and apply on their website for the job listings. And a lot of them hold teaching fairs, either online or in person. I think probably the most popular one is called Search Associates. There's also ISS, International School Services, and Scroll. They used to be one, but I think that they just split up. And then there's also Teacher Horizons. There's GRC, which is Global Recruitment Collaborative. And there's also TIE Online, which is another website, and TES, which is kind of geared more towards British schools. But so that's the agencies that you can sign up for online, and a lot of people find their jobs through that. And so basically nowadays there are fairs, but I would say the majority of the recruitment takes place on Zoom interviews, that are lined up, and you just accept the offer virtually. The other way that sometimes it is useful to find jobs is there is quite a few international teacher groups on Facebook where people will post ads and say, like, hey, we have an opening for English at my school. One is called Teachers on the Move Internationally. This one is a really good one. I think it's probably one of the most popular on Facebook, and there's oftentimes job openings posted on there. There's also a lot of recruiters on that Facebook group as well. And also LinkedIn is a great place. What I would suggest is, if you have countries or schools in mind, reach out to like the principals or the directors at those schools on LinkedIn, maybe connect with them, or, because sometimes they'll post opportunities on LinkedIn. I see this really often. And sometimes you can find opportunities that way. So those are usually the biggest ways. And once you start teaching internationally and you have friends who move on to other schools, you yourself will have quite a bit of a network as well. And that's also something that can be a good way to find jobs. But yeah, I mean, when you look at the agencies and LinkedIn together, that's plenty to be able to see what's out there.
Yeah, that's really awesome. I mean, that would be quite an experience. I know a couple people that have gone south of the US, like Ecuador and Costa Rica and things like that. But and I know they've absolutely loved it. They've loved every second of it. So so for anyone listening that would like to do that, you can also reach out to Amber on her LinkedIn. If you want to plug yourself a little bit here, you're more than welcome to.
Sure. So yeah, you can find me on LinkedIn if you search for me, Amber Acosta, and I am at the Canadian International School, Bengalaru. I think I'm pretty easy to find on LinkedIn.
Yep, absolutely. Well, Amber, thank you so much for bringing a worldly perspective to the world of educational technology. I really appreciate you coming on our podcast. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sean.